It's a time of crisis at the foot of Pikes Peak. The Anselm Society lies below our feet, about ready to just descend into unimaginable chaos. Fortunately, I happen to be next to the Anselm Society bat signal. I turn it on, casting its warm glow up against the clouds overhead, and lo and behold, there are Anselm Society Arts members ready to talk about art's relationship to faith, faith's relationship to arts. They agree to join us in the Anselm Society Digital Pub at the cool table in the far corner. We're sitting there. He's sort of the, I guess, would you be the Robin, or what Batman character would you be?
Wait a second. This is breaking down for me, the bat signal thing.
I'm Batman.
Why
No, you would not be throwing up the signal if you're Batman.
But
They call you. And if you throw an A into the sky, they're going to think anarchy. There's just a lot of problems going on with this.
I didn't think this
Yeah,
through.
the introduction, you obviously, yeah.
So
anyway,
Marcus Robinson is
I'm here.
this guy. I'm Matt Mellema. We're your co-hosts.
Here to clarify.
I am not
He's
Batman.
Batman. I guess I'm Robin in tights.
So I should probably explain.
Which would be terrifying.
We had a couple.
Robin with a beard and tights. That's a whole comic spin on it. It's like middle-aged Robin. Pass me the wine.
They see you walking down the street, just instantly call the police. You're in Arkham for sure.
Totally, yeah.
So
I've seen a lot of
explanation.
things, so it's
Today we had two podcasts scheduled to be recorded. One was the one that you all heard a couple weeks ago with Amy, which was really great discussion about safety, danger, consumption of arts. The other one was supposed to be about detective fiction with Sarah, who's another Arts Guild member, but she became very sick today, and none of us wanted to catch
hope
her
you're
germs.
feeling better, Sarah.
So that is
Probably are by
upcoming.
now.
That is coming up. We'll re-record in a few weeks, but that left us without a second spot today. So I threw up the bat signal, and I guess you would be Batman then, Megan. So you came.
Yes.
You came to answer the signal to talk about this subject that I've been thinking a lot about lately, and I wanted to talk about it on the show, so this is a good chance to get it, even though it's last minute as, Gotham lies in ruins at our feet. But before we get into the subject, let's introduce you. So you are Megan McCluskey.
McCluskey.
I knew it. I was right the first
No,
time.
you got it right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're sort of on the newish end of
am.
our artists, but why
Yeah.
don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Let's see. I am an artist. I paint and mostly landscapes, but that could change. Yeah, just been in the Arts Guild for a few months now, and I just need to talk about art stuff all the time now, it seems. That's the way my life is growing.
You're in the right place.
I am, yep.
Welcome to the table.
Yeah,
Thanks.
this is the Cool Kids table, so we're happy to have you. And also, someone who's also at the table, Amy Lee, actually.
Never left.
We said, thank you so much, Amy, this is a great podcast, and she just orders another round, and there she is.
A round for everybody.
Yay! But seriously, we
It's
actually...
Fat Tuesday, by the way, when we're recording this. So,
That is true.
That's right.
That is true. So, but seriously, we all started talking about the subject beforehand, and Amy graciously offered to stay and maybe throw in her thoughts every now and then too. So you are welcome. We are happy to still have you at the table. And the topic today is one that I think a lot of us think about, especially in the Anselm Society Arts Guild, but maybe more in general as well. And that is when bad people make good art. One of the interesting things is when I was throwing up the bat signal, aka discussing this on our Facebook group, I gave sort of the very general thing, and then lots of us took it in different directions. So I'll start with the direction I wanted to take it, because I'm the one who flicked the bat signal switch. And then maybe I think we could take this a number of different directions. I want everyone's direction before we end it. So for me, this centers around one person in particular. So I was an English major, and English majors, I think, get used to a certain amount of cognitive dissonance in that they really idolize these writers who created beautiful things that they admire and we write term papers about. But we know from even a cursory study of their lives that they were absolutely horrible people. So a couple seminal ones for me here. were Edgar Allan Poe, who I researched a lot in college. I really love his work. I think he's brilliant, and all of his flaws, I don't care, because, you know, they're sort of flaws of a friend who's like, oh, of course, that's just Edgar being Edgar with his poetry. But he was kind of a terrible person. He was very selfish. He was very whiny, very histrionic, and I just know if we were to hang out together, I would hate him. But luckily, I don't have to hang out with him because he's dead, and all we have are his works, which I really like. But the more severe one is Ezra Pound. I feel like Ezra Pound's one of those guys whose poetry you either love or hate, and I, for better or for worse, love his poetry. I have for years. I think it's really brilliant. It's very lyrical. It's very... I could go on. But Ezra Pound sucked. He was a terrible person. He was super into fascism around World War II, and this wasn't the sort of thing where, he sort of went on a flight of fancy when he was like 20, you know, like, it's like, no, we all knew everything after the war, and he still looked at everything that, like, Hitler and Mussolini did and was like, yeah, that's a good idea.
Wow.
And beyond that, he was just a terrible person who was, you know, exploitive, manipulative, all this stuff. He sucked. But I love his poetry, and I have often wondered how to place that. And that's just one example of lots and lots of examples we have of bad people making good art. Lots of good people make bad art, too. That's
different topic.
Yeah, that's a different topic.
That's more intolerable, it would seem. Actually.
But Marcus?
Good people making bad art. That's the unforgivable sin right there.
Marcus, I imagine you have done a lot of thinking about this too. And are there any examples you have of someone who you know they're a terrible person, but you really admire their art?
Well, I was thinking about this question today, and I don't know if we're starting in the right place. I mean, like David comes to mind. He's pretty problematic. Wrote quite a bunch of scripture.
He would not be allowed to work at any like Christian ministry in today's world.
No, definitely not. Yeah.
As a lawyer, I'd recommend not hiring someone with David's past record.
But so David's there. But I mean, there are. I mean, John Lennon, brilliant, and I think it's such an influence on my life, on music, on modern music for sure. But John was, he was selfish, man, and he had a lot of flaws in his life, obviously, but he was also he was a great musician, great composer, great songwriter. I think you just go right down the line. So I don't know. I mean, it's just all of us. I mean, like we're all pretty wretched. Isn't that kind of the idea? I don't know who we can leave out of the list. Is there somebody you would put on the list who is like, they're just wonderful people and they make great art? I guess that'd be my question. Who falls in that category?
That's a very fair question. Okay. I will say I am quite a bad sinner and have been my entire life.
I was just wanting you to say that.
But while we're doing this, and that is an important caveat to make, but I'm guessing we all have this sort of person in mind. So Megan, when you think, who's that awful person who doggone it makes beautiful art? Okay. Who do you think of?
Well, I mean, a few groups of people, but I do think a name popped up in my head because he was really controversial in the visual art, in the realist movement, 1800s, Gustave Courbet, and he was pushing back against the romantic period of art where everything was just kind of flowery, not very realistic, and he said, no, I want it to be very realistic, and that led to like the Impressionists. You could say he was kind of like a bridge, and he is a brilliant artist, and I have always really enjoyed his. Specifically, there's these great wave paintings that he did, and they're amazing. But I remember the part in art history class back in college when we started to look at his other works. And there is one that I actually have seen in person as part of a class in Paris. You can go see it at the Musée d'Orsay. I mean, whatever, do what you want. But it's called Origins of the World, I think. I think that's what it's called. It's just not, it's just a porn basically.
Oh.
And it was created for, your eyes just got so big, Marcus.
We need to give like a parental warning right now.
Porn.
If you have young children,
I mean, I was about to be more descriptive.
shield your children's ears right now.
Okay.
Mom, if you're listening, I'm sorry I foisted Megan upon you.
I'm sorry.
No, seriously, keep going.
Is this also? It's at the Musée de.
It is on display at the Musée d'Orsay, which is an amazing museum in Paris that I was able to go to in college. It was an awesome experience. But, you know, we kind of knew going into it, like, you kind of have to walk behind this partition, and it's like there's signs like, protect your children.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this is not just nudes.
No.
Oh, okay. This is the origin of the world, using your imagination. There we go. Okay.
Use your imagination. Yeah. So, and it was like...
Thanks. Now I have something to confess. It's Ash Wednesday.
I did not see it going in this direction. Anyway, this is like, like 1870 something, and it was a commissioned piece of art that someone had put in like their bedroom, you know, and it had another work of art, like kind of like doors in front of it. It was like this very like, you are squirming.
I'm picturing this like
so bad
this
right
like
now.
rich, I'm picturing this like rich pervert back in the day.
Exactly. Perfect.
Wow.
Perfect.
But it's fascinating.
It is fascinating, I guess. I mean, what can you say
I mean,
about
that
it?
kind of leads to the question that so I'm guessing you will now look at all of his other beautiful paintings and like, yeah, this is beautiful. This is the same dude who made this.
The origins of the world.
Yeah. So then does that like color how you view the other stuff or?
A little. I mean, in that case, I can kind of see like his whole thing. I read a little bit more about him today. After I was thinking about him, I'm like, maybe I should know about this guy a little bit more, refresh my memory. And he was really like, his thing was controversy, and so I think he was kind of pushing the bounds, and he was all about liberty, you know, and just like, we need to go in this direction. We need realism, and I'm gonna try everything in realistically.
But isn't that, I mean, this is, I mean, just that idea is really important to this conversation, because art is always a reaction against something.
Yeah.
And so there was something that he wanted to speak into.
Yes.
And that he wanted to push in a different direction.
Yes.
And I think that that's really important to recognize in this.
Yeah. I mean, he wasn't included in one of they had like these like big like art fairs, basically like the World's Fair, and he didn't get invited one year, and so he like made this like makeshift like building beside it and like put up all his own stuff, and there was like parody art, and so I guess maybe he's a little bit easier to swallow because
that's kind of awesome. Like that's great.
Yeah.
It is awesome.
I guess the one that it's hard for me to look at, knowing the one that seems a little more perverse, is actually Edgar Degas. Because I mean, did you guys see his show? The show that they had at the Denver Museum last summer.
I didn't. I remember vaguely. I think I read like a bits and pieces of biography about him. So you saying Degas, I remember it rang a bell. Like, oh yeah,
he's kind of creepy. Right?
I didn't know he had a first name. I just thought it was like Sting. So, okay.
No name, Degas, all that stuff. Yeah. Now when I look at the ballerina pictures, I'm like, ugh. He's kind of creepy.
Uh-oh.
Because he was...
Oh, you just ruined those for me.
I'm sorry. And the thing is, they're really beautiful. The ballerina pictures are. But once you kind of, like, know, like, what... He was kind of obsessed with nudes. And in not honoring ways, like, he did a lot of drawings that they were not honoring to the subject. And I think that I mean, my opinion of nude art is... I mean, the human body is a beautiful creation, male and female. And so to depict it artistically, even nude, can be done well if it is done in an honoring way. So he does have some that is, but a lot of it is not. And so that has kind of colored how I see his other more whimsical works. Does that answer your question?
No, it does. And I mean, like, each one of these kind of has its own, like, subset of questions that goes along with it, right? Because, like, for someone like Degas, like, I evidently never seen, like, the very controversial things, but the ones I have seen are, like, they're really beautiful, and I mean, it really appreciated his work. But does the fact that he does beautiful things make the fact that he does these other things worse? And also, the fact that the visual artist has this other dimension too, where the act of creating it probably involved exploiting a vulnerable person, right? So that kind of adds this whole other dimension to it, which I will think about the next time I view a Degas. But before we unpack that more, Amy, you thought you could escape this by being at the end of the table. When you think bad person, good art, what do you think?
I thought it was interesting what Marcus brought up in terms of King David, because that automatically made me think of Solomon.
Right.
I mean, David you could maybe uphold in the sense that God called him the man after his own heart, and that obviously he repented after Nathan came to him. But Solomon, thinking of his declining years, and the fact that we still have the book of Proverbs and the Song of Songs, I guess that gives us a little bit of a blueprint in terms of how God is able to, I guess, I don't want to use the word utilize, but just skip over it for now, utilize an artist to show more of his character or just as an artist. I don't have a particularly shocking example when I think of had people making art, but I think something that comes to mind that has kind of been at the forefront for me over the last few years is artists who are trying to convey hope through their work who are also mired in depression or anxiety. And especially when it comes to Christian art, that becomes a very tenuous thing, because how much do we invest in taking in the works of somebody who maybe in the eyes of some believers isn't able to overcome certain difficulties in their lives. So that maybe adds a little bit more of a dimension than you desired to this conversation. But in terms of the credibility of an artist, that's what comes to mind for me.
So the credibility of an artist, I mean, I guess it kind of comes to this whole idea, is the idea of art, or even Christianity, is the idea of moral goodness.
Right.
Is that why Jesus died? To make us all morally good? Because if so, like, we all suck. We failed. Let's stop. I mean, that isn't the point of the gospel. I was thinking this whole thing. It's why I think the Bible is such a gracious book, because we're not given just the 10 Commandments. We have all these stories and poems, and we have this very, I mean, it is alive, and it's full of real people, very earthy, like us, like people in our neighborhoods. There's something in that I think we need to bring when we're trying to evaluate art. I mean, all of the different artists we've mentioned are people who are in process, and we're all in process when we encounter them too.
Yeah, and I think another dimension of that too is I think it'd be healthy at times to identify a person who is very obviously and very severely flawed in certain ways, but despite all that, he's still, they're still able to articulate, some sliver of truth correctly. There's one Ezra Pound poem that I really, really love called The Ballad of the Goodly Fear. I'm not going to read it right now because you need like a Cockney accent to make it right, and I would just embarrass myself. But basically, it is a poem where the speaker is one of Jesus' disciples, and the poem is about Jesus. And it's not a perfect portrayal of Jesus. He's sort of this manly He-Man, sort of cranked up to 11. But he wrote this in response to like this gentle Jesus, meek and mild, like Charles Dickens sort of view of him. Yeah. And I think, just viewing the poem on its own, I think there's a lot of things in it that are good and true and beautiful. And seeing it come from this man who certainly did not care about implementing any of Jesus' teachings in his life, I think it's a good indication that God can use even very flawed speakers to get his truth out.
And isn't that so upsetting? Like, God would use a fascist? Come on, Lord.
Yes.
Well, it leaks into everything, right? Like, the truth will leak into anything creative.
Yeah.
I mean, arguably.
One might say.
Maybe not. We can talk about it. Maybe I just brought up all this. But, like, if you're trying to uplift anything uplifting, like, he's talking about Jesus. Like, even if it's making Jesus be, like, semi-fascist. Macho man.
None of the fascism comes out in that poem, I should say.
Okay, all right. I haven't read that
That
one.
poem is not fascist.
Good to know. Noted.
So, can you think of somebody who is just like this, I don't know, I mean, like the Mother Teresa, or somebody who is, you know, they're so virtuous, but they make this art that is just stunning? Like, do you have an example? I'm trying to think of somebody like that.
I mean, I'm sure if we, you know, like Port Hesiod, we could think of something. But I think, like, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the point beneath what you're saying there is this whole thing of, like, trying to figure, oh, he's a bad person, you know, she's a good person. Is that sort of like a fool's errand where it's like, okay, we're all flawed. Some people have maybe more obvious flaws. Some people have flaws that society will notice and condemn more, but we're all flawed people. And I think that's a very fair point, but that still gets, like, there are some instances where I still feel uncomfortable. And, like, one instance, something I kind of go with is, I'm going to butcher his name because it's one of those names I read all the time, but I don't say. Vladimir Nabokov. He's a brilliant writer whose native language was Russian. Then he comes over, learns English as a second language, and writes beautiful things in English, which is mind-blowing. But I've read very little of him. I read a short story, Ultima Thule, which is absolutely gorgeous. It's a really brilliant work. But he also wrote that book Lolita, which is also really well done, but is told from the point of view of a pedophile. And it is controversial, to say the least.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, a big part of me feels guilty when I read anything by Nabokov, even if it's not dealing directly with, like, the Lolita subject matter, because, like, okay, here's a mind who created this. He had reasons for it. Like, I'm not saying the book wasn't in praise of pedophilia. It was just, I think he was trying to get us to, you know, humanize him or whatever. But that still makes me quite uncomfortable. Maybe I'm being irrational, but it still makes me uncomfortable.
Welcome to art.
Why can't it just soothe me and reassure me of what I already thought?
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes it's better to walk around with your eyes half closed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Museum galleries and libraries, and, you know, there are writers that you encounter and writers that we love, that we uphold. Say at Anselm, you know, with Lewis and Tolkien, and there are controversial parts of their lives too, as well. And so it doesn't do to look too closely. I mean,
Yeah, or Martin Luther. I mean, Martin Luther and his
exactly.
anti-Semitism, you know?
Yeah.
There are these pieces that, yeah, not okay, dude. Not okay. You can't, there's no justifying it, but there is something to be grappled with that this person has brought, which is, yeah.
Yeah, and maybe one of those... Because one of the lines I saw sort of coming out when we were all sort of giving our, you know, bad people, was the
We're bad people.
Such a label.
yeah, the difference between, like, mediums, because with, you know, with something like a novel, you don't actually have to do anything unsavory to write something, whereas with, like, what you were saying, Megan, with Degas, it's like, some of that stuff is actually the product of, you know, abuse of power, you know, taking advantage of someone in a vulnerable position. So how do you wrestle with that, especially someone in the visual arts world, where do you think there's something to saying, like, okay, so this piece, maybe it has artistic merit, but I know for a fact that, like, the model there was...
a prostitute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, how do you make sense of that aspect of it?
I recently make sense of it. I would say that's an ongoing, like, discussion I have with myself. It's hopefully others sometimes, like right now, which is always nice. But I recently listened to a sermon, and I don't remember who the example was, but it was kind of like, the example was, like, basically, like, how slavery used to be such an integrated part of society that, like, people, like, had no imagination for it to not exist.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's applicable to this era of art history. where all like most of the okay, I don't know how accurate I'm being, but
to just do the full hot take. Say all.
Just
broad
push it out there.
sweeping.
We dare you to challenge this statement. We dare you.
Okay, there were a lot of impressionists that used, and that was kind of just like the general assumption that they were. That's how you got a nude model, was to hire a prostitute, and like. There was, I can't remember the name of the piece, but anything named like Venus ... is generally like some of these women would become like slightly more like famous, or because like especially if the painting was accepted at like a World's Fair or something. And so then it's kind of like exploitation to like at what point are you like, is it ever honoring of this woman's body, or I don't know. And like maybe from her perspective, because it was like considered higher art. And I mean, there's so many different nuances. Sorry, where am I going? What was your original question?
Well, it was all the stuff that I'm thinking now is now every time we go to our museum, Venus in. Oh crap! Oh.
What does this mean?
There it is, Venus ...
The thing is, there are Venus ... I just coined that.
Yeah.
There are some that are really beautifully well done. And I remember I've done it's called figure drawing, by the way, when you draw a nude person. And I took a figure drawing class in school, and I definitely had like a favorite model because she was just the most beautiful, like just shapely model that we had. Like it was harder, like just getting into details.
All those ugly people were no fun to draw at all.
No, like if they were even just like really like buff dudes, it was a little harder to find like interesting things to draw because it was more, I don't know. Sorry. Okay, getting artsy.
It's the struggle of the painter.
But now you're like entering my thought process.
It's real, right? I mean, this is actually. I mean, so this is the stuff that nobody thinks of. I think.
Yeah.
Like this. All of a sudden, we're not safe again. We're trying to make art, and so you're studying the human body, how to draw a figure, and it's real people.
Yeah.
And you have Michelangelo, who was doing autopsies, essentially.
Troubling.
Study.
Yeah.
The cadavers and stuff.
I mean, it basically came down to like you're sitting there on a drawing. It's called a drawing horse, and you're like picking your angle, and it's this subject matter, but also a human being.
Right.
And so it becomes this like, and you could move around the room. So I was always looking for that honoring pose. What would this look like to portray this human person beautifully? And usually it was possible and became like a very satisfying part of my education. But yeah, I think it just really, it has to do with the artist's intention, and I think that does come out, especially with that type of subject matter when you're depicting a human body. I think you can kind of like start to see on the other side of the canvas.
Well, it is that. I mean, it's that old question of, what makes the line between art and pornography? What is the thing that all of a sudden, is that the intention of the artist, or is that in the eye of the person looking at it? I think that if somebody's struggling in that area, it's probably a lot harder for them to draw that line, And then if somebody is, they're coming and they're seeing it from the perspective of an artist, and they're looking at this and they're seeing the beauty of the line and the capturing of a human body, that is a very different frame, than exploitation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, speaking of exploitation, we're going to go down a very pleasant road right now.
All the stuff you wanted to think about when you turned on this podcast, welcome.
Well, that gets us into sort of the contemporary moment where we're still in the sort of Me Too era, where it turns out that a lot of producers, actors, directors, etc., were engaging all sorts of exploitive behavior. I don't need to go into too much detail. We all know this. So, I'll say for me, I was just scrolling through Netflix, and one of the movies that pops up is Emma, which is a Harvey Weinstein one where there's all these allegations surrounding it, and I'm thinking, let's say I just really wanted to watch Emma because I thought it was an excellent movie or all this other stuff. Does the fact that its producer is this horrible person who engaged in this horrible exploitive behavior during it, is that a reason to not watch it, or is that just sort of going down a rabbit hole that will lead us to all these weird places?
Who's got the answer?
I haven't seen it. But generally, visual stuff in any form does impact me a lot. And I mean, I've talked to people who said, yeah, I can watch horror or sex and nudity and it doesn't affect me. And I've had this debate with friends before. But for me, I'm definitely more on the sensitive side. And so
but that movie's safe. I mean, it's Jane Austen, right?
Yeah, so it's basically a modern adaptation of the Jane Austen Emma. I don't know if I actually saw it, but if I did see it, it was in those golden days before Me Too and everything was ruined.
Wait, that Emma?
That Emma.
Oh, I've seen that movie.
Sorry to break it to you, but
dang it!
It's pretty awful, scary movie.
But so that Emma.
I did not know.
Now that I've ruined this for you, will you go back to it?
Gwyneth Paltrow.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh my Lord.
Now that I've ruined it for you, will you go back to it, feeling some sort of guilt that Gwyneth Paltrow was actually one of the victims of it in this? So
during the film.
Leading up to it, I don't want to get into too many seedy details, but yeah. Huh. So should that affect the way we watch it? Should that?
Well, I've been watching it, I guess.
I think it does. I mean, yeah, there is. I think it does. These stories come out of crass things that happen in directors, and I think you have to just put that on. I think you may still be. Sometimes you can look and go, okay, this movie, it does this really well, but gosh, it's just kind of, there's a shadow over it now. It's just real, right?
Yeah, and I'm trying to figure out, is it just is this a real concrete moral concern, or is it just I feel weird about it, and if someone doesn't feel weird about it, that's fine. I don't know, but I would feel weird watching Emma right now. Just knowing what I know, and I don't know,
because you have more information, and it's if you think about it from a journalistic perspective, I just read something about someone, and the way that September 11th kind of played out. The first time you saw, you heard the news, you thought a private plane probably crashed. It was an accident or something, and then you get more information and it gets more and more awful and more and more evil as the information comes in. And don't you think that's sort of the same thing? As truth is revealed, why shouldn't it change whether you can stomach Emma or not?
Yeah, you can construct an argument where it's okay, so Harvey Weinstein, the producer, he's a horrible human being. We'll all agree to that. But most, the movie's a production of the whole cast. There's all these writers and directors and everything that have nothing to do with all that. And the movie standing on its own is, there's nothing untoward in that. And so why should we let one awful person destroy the whole thing? Is that legitimate, or is that just sort of rationalization? Amy, you have a very thoughtful look in your eyes, so I'm gonna make you answer my impossible question.
What if we took a different tack? I mean, I think it's possible to rationalize anything, and we're trying to. I think the difficulty in, this art discussion is we're trying to come up with a system under which what's permissible and what's not. But if we came at it from the angle of that your reaction to finding out a detail like that if it's not, oh my goodness, that's so wrong, something to fuel a sense of self-righteousness, wouldn't it be more effective? This sounds so manipulative, but ideally, I think learning a piece of information like that, whether it's about an artist who's centuries old or something that's going on in the current era, the right response, I feel like, would be that it grieves you. Mm-hmm. And then I feel like the natural outcome of that would be that you don't want to watch, things that are maybe tied with it. And if you do choose to watch it, it will be for a different reason than, it's not so bad, or it involved more people. Does that make more sense?
Yeah.
So, like, if we were going through a gallery of Degas paintings, and honestly, and I didn't know that about Edgar Degas, and yes, now it's going to color my perception of his ballerina paintings too, right? That I think maybe that's why, like, in this whole journey of, as I'm walking with my kids through looking at art and music and history, the figures that I am drawn to as an adult are the people who seem to have a more holistic view of living life. So not necessarily the madmen who sacrificed everything that they had for the art, but people who are able to say the art is important, but the family is important. My family is important too. I feel like these are both charges that have been given to me. To me, those are personally important stories because I'm also trying to create something while having a family, while living out life in all kinds of different spheres. So going back to the rationalization question, I would like to think that the way that we're affected by art isn't just mental and rational, but it's something that we react to in a way that helps guide our decisions in terms of what we're going to view in the future. It's not possible for us to know all the details about everybody's lives or the background of a given piece, but I would like to think that art has more to do with the shaping and more to do with how we integrate it and choose to integrate it into our lives than just, I'm going to choose to view this and I'm not going to choose to view this on these grounds that apply universally.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think it helps us to understand the lines. I mean, it is the human story. So, like, the Great Pyramids, they're pretty amazing. The Sphinx, they're pretty oppressive. You know how they're constructed. Should we tear them down? And yet in our country, if you're African American, and maybe this person was a great sculptor, but they did a Confederate soldier, and you're in the South, and that's conflicting. And you're like, yeah, I'm not really appreciative of that statement continuing in the place where I live and raise my family. And so you may want that torn down. I think this is the struggle we have, and I'm sure there's all kinds of great art that has been, done away with because of those concerns in the time.
And I want to take us in a slightly different direction, but first, I have been handed the note by Brian Brown.
Oh, the note.
The note. I'm keeping all this going. The whole thing.
I wish we had a sound effect for the notes when they came in and be like, ding.
That's a great idea. But anyway,
a choir should sound from Brian Brown. How's that?
Brian, if you're listening, get on this. This would be great. But anyway, what I really want to tell you all is the world has been disenchanted.
Yeah.
I like how you just casually nod. You're just so used to the disenchanted world.
I think we've proven that on this podcast.
Yes, we showed just how disenchanted everything is. But Christians belong to a decisively established kingdom, but our daily lives bear the brunt of ugliness, pressure, and banality, forces great and small that divorce the wonders of God from our sight. Worn and disillusioned, we sometimes wish the unseen realities were as evident as a physical realm beyond the back of a wardrobe. But Brian Brown and the rest of us are here to say they can be. See, maybe first step in that direction, you can check out the Imagination Redeemed Conference 2019. This will be Friday and Saturday, April 26th through 27th, 2019. This will be at the Pinery at the Hill, otherwise known as the feudal overlords for all the peasants like me who live around Colorado Springs.
Wait, what?
Sorry.
Massive struggle.
So the
place in the world.
The Pinery on the Hill is, this hill overlooking like Old Colorado City. Yeah. And I live in Old Colorado City, and me and my wife say that that's like the feudal manor, and we're the peasants down below them.
The feudal manor. Got
yes.
it. Yeah.
So if you want to feel like a feudal baron while helping to re-enchant the world,
Because that will help you.
come
This whole
to
quest
Imagination
for
Redeemed
goodness.
2019, and seriously, by the time you're getting this will be like, this will probably post in like late March, so you need to get on this right now, because honestly the tickets may already be all sold out by the time you get it. But
Watch the teaser trailer. You'll see like how beautiful it is here.
exactly. So there's a lot of guests and speakers that will be there, all on topics related to the reintegration of art into the life of the church. So please check it out. Once again, that's Imagination Redeemed. You can find all sorts of information about that on the Anselm website, or just Google it. You know how the internet works. And with that, I want to take this in a slightly different direction now.
Okay.
And this is going to be one of those things producers going to have to cut. Can you pause it? Okay, so let's try to take this in a slightly different direction, because I think what we've been talking about are
We've solved nothing.
we have solved nothing. If anything, we've
Muddied the water.
muddied the waters.
Stirred the pot.
Yeah. But something I was reading this past week sort of was pointing to like the other side of this impulse to sort of save yourself from, the bad people making good art. So I was reading this article that was about Ezra Pound, and it was things in New York Review of Books. But anyway, the premise of it was that back after World War II, when we all realized that Ezra Pound was a horrible fascist, there was an anthology of American poetry, and the person putting it together decided to exclude Ezra Pound, not because of the merits of his work, but because Ezra Pound was, a fascist and a terrible person. And one of the people who came out very strongly against that was W.H. Auden. And I should say W.H. Auden he's like my guy.
He's your favorite.
I basically write for whatever he says. But he wrote very strongly against it, and he actually did not think very highly of Ezra Pound's poetry. But he said, you can't exclude him on the basis that he has all this, all these terrible beliefs, did all these terrible things. Because first of all, that doesn't come through in the poetry. The poetry itself is still the high quality it is, regardless of what beliefs were sort of rattling around the author's head when he did it. And second, he pointed to the fact that if we're going to exclude all the poetry because the subject who created it was, tainted, if we carry this down too far, this can lead us to some very dangerous roads, some, dare we say, fascist roads, where we need to get rid of everything associated with the author. Because this person had these awful stuff, we can't read his poetry, we can't let him participate in society, we can't do all this, and this leads us to a very dangerous place. So, viewing that, maybe especially in light of our current climate, should we be hitting the brakes when our impulse is to say, oh, this guy did this bad stuff, so let's just disregard all the movies he made, all this stuff?
Yeah, I think like a great example is Bill Cosby. So Bill Cosby, this is horrible.
Yeah. He'll be in prison for the rest of his life, and he deserves to be.
He deserves to be.
Yeah.
And I have all these records that I grew up with that are hilarious. As a comedian, he was original. He was clean. He was, he was the Cosby dad, all these things that now you're like, oh. So, yeah, I have a hard time listening to any of those old records. I haven't thrown them out, but it is one of those things where, didn't C.S. Lewis say something about judging work on its own versus, he hated the idea of biography, right? He didn't want, the idea of somebody writing his biography, he was like, ugh, just look at my work, right? That was kind of C.S. Lewis. Do you remember the quote around that, Amy?
Sounds like something he'd say, and he would be so disappointed in all of us. But idly gossiping about Joy Gresham or whatever. Keep going.
I think that was the idea, though, is that, I think C.S. Lewis knew, people's lives are so flawed, and please don't dig up my journals and publish them. Look at what I wrote and judge it by what is there. But I don't know, in the current climate, it'd be really hard to to do that.
Well, I also wonder if we should look differently at things that are going on right now versus things that people that are, already dead and gone. Because, one of the things that's bothered me, different like comedians who all this horrible stuff comes out. Like with Louis C.K., he was one of those people. And he sort of gave his apology and sort of stepped back for a little while. And then he came back and he got like a standing ovation for the crowd who was feeling very forgiving of him. And I looked at it, I was like, first of all, that's kind of soon. And second, are we sure everything's like okay now? And I don't know, maybe that's just because that's going on right now. I kind of feel like it needs to sit. I feel like he could use some more time to
gain back trust.
Yeah, exactly. So do you think it's rational to like be like, okay, maybe like 50 years from now I can go back to, Louis C.K. more objectively, but like right now I kind of don't want to go there.
Well, time definitely gives some perspective.
And I guess if we're sort of looking at the dangers of this, this is also something we were chatting about before we started recording, but there's like the craziness that's going on with like the YA scene right now, where it doesn't seem like it's the readers themselves, like the teenagers, but like the adults who are like critiquing and publishing and being the agents for all this that have created a very toxic, seems like a mild word for the environment, where it's basically people will see books that haven't been written yet, decide that they're, racist, homophobic, throw whatever word you want at it, and basically Twitter shamed the author into withdrawing it. And I mean, you can see that those same principles, it's basically the concern of W.H. Auden carried out to its kind of absurd conclusion, where it's like, okay, this author may have had like a racist impulse or had this line that was, like sexist or whatever. And because of that, the whole thing is tainted. And we need to remove the whole taint. And we need to, like go and disinfect it, because the taint is like asbestos and it gets in everything. So we need to do everything, and it's driving people away like completely.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are in a time of reaction right now. And so I think that is what it is. And I think there's a reason for that reaction, because of these stories that have come out, and there needs to be response to that. And so usually our reactions are not measured, and because how can they be? It does become this thing where, you want to make a statement, and we want to say, no, we're not going to tolerate that kind of behavior anymore. We want things to be different, and that's a good impulse, I think. But how that will be measured in time is going to be interesting to see.
And it does seem that the measure in the climate we're in right now does seem to be that reactive posture, rather than, I guess my question, or what I'm just kind of like tossing around in my head right now, is like, where is the free play? Like, where is what is the trajectory of a person's life? What are they pointing at and aiming for? And I think you're absolutely right. Like, there are structures of exploitation and abuse, and whenever we see like glimpses of that, it's like, no, like, we do not want to go down that road anymore. And I do think that's a good thing, but it seems to be that that's more prevalent than like this new higher road, that like there's less examples. And I mean, we're even struggling to say like, who is that artist that is, like this exemplary person, or like what is the ideal? Like, what are we going for? Like, where can we go, or what can we look at? And it has to be, I'm going to say it, goodness, truth, and beauty. It has to be that. And that's what we have to spend our time focusing on, so that, everything else will just kind of, the hope is that it will fall away, right? Like, we have to, like, fix our eyes.
Do you know, it makes sense to me that the turmoil that's happening in YA right now is happening in the YA sphere. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that has to do with the fact that when you have adults who are trying to find things that are good and appropriate for their audience, and this has happened all throughout history, you're going to be concerned with what is being communicated, because in art, what you're communicating is not just a technique or a certain perspective. If you follow an artist, you're going to get a certain way of looking at the world. And I think that's part of what this boils down to, is that we want to be discerning about the types of artists that we follow. And almost too much, though, I think sometimes, because then we're looking at, how was he looking at the world? How do I not let that taint my view of the world? And when you've got adults looking at young adults, then you're starting to think about, like, well, how is this piece of literature going to affect the way that they look at the world, the way that they view bigotry or prejudice or any kind of thing like that? How do we teach them to react to it? Is the character reacting to it in the right way in the book? Should we even go there with this topic? Because maybe the kids can't handle it. I mean, and really that's been true through the generations.
Fear-based, right?
Yes, like the church has said, can the people handle this? Or the governments have said, can the people handle this? And so I think part of what we're missing is not the guidelines, just the guidelines, but having an intact and robust enough worldview enough to come to any piece of art and say, what do I draw out of this? And what can I take away from it that is meaningful without taking away things that I shouldn't, if that makes sense.
I think it's a little easier with rock and roll because we just assume everybody is like awful. You know, it's like, well, of course they slept with a bunch of women and they're narcissistic, you know, and
so anything good that comes out of it is like a
wow,
gem.
look at that. Yeah, it's like, hey, look at that a little bit, you know. But that also becomes like this oversimplification of it, right? Like, I mean, you can take a guy like David Bowie, who, I mean, what a brilliant artist. And his journey is so fascinating, all of his struggles, and yet who he became known as just this great guy. I mean, people who knew him and his family were just, he was wonderful to be around. People wanted to be around him. And yet he had all this experimentation, all these things that, you know, was scandalous, you know, for me growing up. But David Bowie, you know, is... I think we'll look back and we'll go, this guy he pushed boundaries musically, and he was experimental and so brilliant in his painting, you know, and what he did sonically. But yeah, and he was a good man despite his experimentation or whatever. I don't know. Maybe it's easier in that era because it's a 3-minute song, and so you're looking at one song. Yeah. You know, and so you go, oh yeah, this David Bowie song speaks to me in this little way. It's a pop song, versus, oh my God, it's going to hang on my wall forever. You know, or this is influencing our children. You know, by these books that they're really going to contemplate. There is more of an idea of, it's a pop song, it can be fun and light and be taken at different levels. Maybe we should just look at all music all art that way.
In what way?
In light. As pop
I'm glad you mentioned that, because as we were talking about the visual art and the novels and everything, I was thinking about, like, what is the equivalent for music? Because you can't take, short of having extremely explicit lyrics, you don't think of music as being graphic, you know, and disturbing in that sense.
I'm sure, you know, Terry Moon could be here and tell us all the scandals about, you know, classical composers.
I don't want to know them.
You know, well, who cares? I mean, honestly, who cares? It's either a beautiful classical piece that resonates with you and you're able to say, I enjoy that or not, but you really don't care so much about the composer unless that's your world, I guess. Unless you have to, you know, play violin for them.
Well, I kind of feel like
music wins again. Sorry, I just was waiting for you to set that up. And
you know, that's
dropped it in.
That's not what I was going to say.
I know,
but I'm happy to have sort of lobbed that up to you to spike down.
Yeah.
I feel like I am leaving this conversation less certain than I felt before I entered it. But still, I felt like it was a worthwhile conversation, and thank you all for joining us at the table to confuse everybody. And now, Marcus, will you take us home with a St. Anselm quotation?
Yes. This is Anselm's most famous quote, I think. Well, probably his second most famous, but this is the theological argument. God is that, the greater than which cannot be conceived. So until next time, cheers.